Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy, University of Michigan Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy. You call it CLOSUP, is that right?
A cute little acronyms that helps us, our little close-up acronym.
I like that. So basically, you are an expert and you study things that are going on in our municipalities. Is that broadly what you do?
That's right. So the research center where I am at the Ford School is a small research center, and we focus on state and local government issues nationwide, but we really have a strong focus on Michigan and what's going on here, both in counties, townships, villages, and cities across the state.
And you are the research project manager at that fine institution. Is there something new that started, new research projects that have started up since this whole COVID-19 matter has reared its ugly head?
We do. The Ford School in general, and then my research center in particular, have been scrambling over the past couple months to try to produce a lot of different resources for communities across the state to be able to access and refer to when they're trying to deal with the emergency. We have in other research centers, we have the Poverty Solutions Center at the Ford School, who's doing a lot of work on what to do with helping low-income residents across the state. We've got people in a youth policy lab doing other kinds of work. And then at the center, the CLOSUP Center, we're putting together a whole series of fiscal health resources for local governments across the state that talk about how to manage the fiscal crisis that's happening because of the economic shutdown related to the pandemic. So all kinds of things about debt and debt management and dealing with budget shortfalls and how to collect property taxes in an era of COVID, things like that. So those are all available to local governments, and we're reaching out to governments across the state to provide those to them to help give them some resources to deal with what is absolutely unprecedented, right?
Well, it is unprecedented. And, for you and I, this is like spicy stuff. I'm loving every moment of it, talking about, budgets and debt for our townships and municipalities. I understand that that's not everybody's cup of tea, but, here we are a municipal television channel, so this is a lot of what we ultimately do here is report on our local municipalities. Back to the resource side for the municipalities, going to be a double whammy. People, I think some of them are aware that the revenue for your local community is derived from property tax dollars and then from revenue sharing from the state of Michigan. So the property tax is related to your ability to pay your local tax and your property values, and the revenue sharing, I assume most of that, Dr. Horner, comes from sales tax and other state revenues, correct?
That's right. And the state has realized, they just did a new budget conference meeting earlier this month talking about predicted shortfalls in what they thought was going to be revenue coming into the state that is then shared back out to local governments, and severe billions of dollars of shortfall that we're going to be looking at how to deal with. Unfortunately, over the past decade, since even before the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, state revenue sharing for local governments across the state has actually declined. So the state has been able to continue to balance their budget by giving, not in total part, but in part by giving local governments less of that statutory revenue sharing that comes from out of the sales tax and is seeded back out to them. So local governments have lost over the past decade billions of dollars of support from the state to run their own local programs like public safety and roads. And so now that we're seeing, local governments have kind of spent the last decade climbing out of the hole from the Great Recession, slowly but surely, making themselves more solvent and solving their problems by doing more with less. And so now taking this hit is going to be a real challenge for them.
So let's talk a little bit more about one other challenge, just so people understand the whole picture. The federal government keeps coming up with all this money. You see it in the news, trillion here, trillion there, PPP program, this, money there. But the federal government can operate at a deficit. State of Michigan cannot operate at a deficit, and neither can our local communities. And I don't think people, all of the people who don't really get into this and live with this every day, really understand that. So that presents a big challenge. States, the property or the sales tax numbers are going to be way down. Fuel tax, all the other money the state's collecting. So they're not going to have the money to dish out. Schools have already been told to expect a lot less money this this year, and the municipalities will. So, what kind of vehicles can a municipality? You alluded to this earlier. What kind of vehicles can a municipality use to deal with some of this budget crisis? Is there any way they can borrow money or move dollars around at all? How does that work?
They can. There's a number of different approaches that they can use to try to get through this. Fortunately, there is some movement at the federal level to now address this problem for local governments at the smaller scale. So in the original CARES Act, it's my understanding, this is actually not my exact area of expertise, but I will tell you that I believe the original CARES Act, the federal government from several weeks ago, provided money for our largest municipalities, not in Michigan necessarily, although I believe Detroit was included, but big urban areas did get some money out of that. But few counties or smaller local governments had any federal money available. They are now in the current bill going through Congress negotiating whether they're going to be able to provide some additional help for local governments. And so I know that here in Michigan, the Treasury Department and the Michigan Municipal League, the Michigan Association of Counties, Michigan Township Association, some of these other associations that help local governments manage the politics of it all, are working very hard at the federal level to make some of that relief money available. Then in addition, there's some relief money available to local governments through FEMA. FEMA has put out some emergency relief funds. Unfortunately, it's funding that really is just based on dealing with COVID effects. So potentially public safety issues and things like that, not necessarily shortfall in your general revenue budget. And so it's a limited source of relief, but it does exist out there. And then the Department of Treasury here in Michigan is doing what they can to try to line up some different sources of funding, be they kind of grouped debt availability to kind of carry over local governments through the crisis. One of the things that a different group within the University of Michigan, the RSQE, which of course I'm going to get their acronym wrong, but it's a group of economists who do economic forecasting for both federal and Michigan economies. They're predicting hopefully a V-shaped recovery, which means we'll have this terrible damage to our economies and to employment, but that hopefully once we restart the economy, that might bounce back. If that's the case, local governments are somewhat fortunate in that the hit to property taxes may rebound quickly as well. The effects of bad economies tend to lag in local government revenues. They have the revenues they need to spend this year, and it's really looking at the additional expenditures from COVID and then looking ahead to next year, whether there's going to be continued economic pain. That's when you start to get nervous. So I think that's what when I hear from local government officials across the state, that's what I hear is they're hurting now from trying to help people who are out of work, help people who need additional medical and public safety assistance. But really what they're doing is looking ahead to whether this is going to be a long-term or a short-term economic recession.
Yeah, and we like to say in this show, it was a quote that came from one of our brilliant superintendents right here in our area. It happened to be Pat Watson at Bloomfield Hills. I credit him for this. And every time he uses words, hope is not a plan. Hope is not a plan, and that is very true. And so our municipalities, they have their hands full getting ready. We were right there in the boardroom in a couple communities getting ready just to, deal with the health issues surrounding the pandemic. And now they may have an equally difficult challenge dealing with the financial impact of all this. There was, just to follow up on your comments of a couple of minutes ago, we did see some federal money pour into Oakland County and Macomb County, hundreds of millions of dollars, and that sounds like a big number, but by the time you distribute that to the county and the programs they need, and they were able to share some of that money with Oakland County municipalities, but it doesn't really go a long way, and they also elected to share some of that money with Oakland County businesses. But we have more than $100 million problem, or $200 or $300 million problem. Dr. Horner, I wasn't going to ask this, but I might as well. Do you have any idea of the scope of the problem facing municipalities around the state of Michigan? Is that something you're trying to figure out right now?
I think we're just so unsure about how this is all rolling out from week to week and the effects on being able to open back up, being able to staff their offices, being able to assist their local hospitals, where the additional cases might occur. Right now, Southeast Michigan is obviously our a municipal hotspot in dealing with illness, but will that spread to the rest of the state? It's unclear. So I think there's just so many unknowns with that. One of the things that I hope is that the state and the state agencies and these some of our other municipal leaders can come together and not isolate different communities, but work as a whole, not make every community reinvent the wheel, but share resources, share ideas, share best practices with each other, so that small townships or small villages or small cities across the state aren't at loose ends and not knowing what to do and how to deal with their problems. We're all in the same boat. The larger places are struggling with some kinds of problems that are different from smaller places, but at the same time, we have a really strong network of townships, cities, and villages, and then of course counties, that I think we can all work together, and that would be really helpful in helping everyone weather the crisis, as opposed to kind of just having everybody go it alone.
It will. All right, let's get off this money thing. It's a little depressing anyway. There's a lot of other issues we can talk about. She's Dr. Deborah Horner from the Center of Local, State, and Urban Policy, University of Michigan, Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, and a research project manager there. First of all, we're seeing people work at home now from the business community on the private sector. Do you think we're going to see some of that in the public sector as well? Will it spill over? Any thoughts?
Well, certainly at the University of Michigan, we've had a huge shift in our own way of working. I would typically be spending lots of time meeting with students, meeting with my colleagues, cross-pollinating ideas across the university, and that has had to all shift online very rapidly. So we've been finding new ways to do that kind of work. Luckily, we tend to, it's relatively easy for us because we are sharing information. And so I think there's a lot of concern among my colleagues whether we'll be back to a regular campus life in the fall or not. It's hard when you have tens of thousands of students on campus all smushed together. So we're watching that and seeing how the continuation of the pandemic is going to affect our work at the university. Other public institutions don't really have as much opportunity to work remotely. I think they will where they can, but for example, right now I'm doing a lot of work with city and township clerks as they prepare for the coming election. And clearly there's an issue of how are we going to hold in-person voting in August and November. Sometimes people forget we have an August primary on the 4th in August, which is just a couple months away.
Right.
And so we've got it's not just November we have to worry about, but that August primary is coming up fast. And our local clerks, while fortunately in 2018, Michigan passed a constitutional amendment saying that we can now vote absentee ballot. Thank goodness that we passed that back in 2018, and all of our clerks had a couple of years to gear up for that. But there are still people who are going to want or need to vote in person, or they'll be allowed to. And so figuring that out, it's not going to be all remote, and there's going to be some challenges to local governments to put that into place to make sure that voters are safe and poll workers are safe.
Well, no question about it. And you're right. 2 elections, one in August, one in the fall. We've all heard about this one in the fall almost every day on the news. So we know those are coming up. Just another angle. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but that's okay. We get deep in the weeds in this show. I was talking to one of our clerks the other day, and Debbie Binder in West Bloomfield, and she said she's got a whole nother issue because a lot of the election workers have been retired people. And that age group right now, a lot of them, rightfully so, don't want to be in front of the public to the degree that you would have to be in an election. So our municipalities are going to have to train a whole lot of election workers who are going to be working the polls possibly for the first time ever. I know that's not just a concern in her community, it's a concern everywhere. So I mention that because I'd like your thoughts on that, but also just as an opinion appeal to anyone listening if you'd want to, have some fun, especially young people, right? And what a
Yeah.
great opportunity to get a great lesson in civics, right? To go work an election. So go do it. But I assume that's a problem for a lot of our communities.
Well, and they pay you too. So it's a paying job. Go ahead and get trained. You'll get paid for the training and you'll get paid for the day that you work in the polls. So it's not bad.
I assume you got to, I assume you have to be 18 to do that. But if you
I
didn't,
believe so.
I would think so. But if you didn't, maybe that would be a great thing for some high school programs to work on. Maybe we can get to work on that. So let's talk about the election. Controversy here in the state. The state has decided to send out absentee ballot registrations to every voter in the state of Michigan. And, clearly the president wasn't too happy with that idea. Is this something that was contemplated back in 2018 when the rules were changed about absentee voting? And any thoughts you have on the matter?
Yeah, I don't think there was any thought that the state would email or would mail out ballot applications. So I want to be clear for everybody understands these are not actual ballots that you would use to vote. This is an application form that you have to send in to your local clerk that says that you want an absentee ballot. You sign that so that they can compare that with the signature they have on file for your voter registration, and that's when they send out the actual absentee ballot to you. So you can actually get, in many elections, although the state doesn't do this sending out of application forms, lots of get out the vote operations, campaigns, and different groups will send out these kinds of things. So you may get 4 or 5 of them in the mail in any given election season from different places.
In fact, it's interesting you mentioned
an absentee ballot, right? It's not.
Sorry about the delay. It's interesting you mentioned that, though, because I got one of those. I got one in the mail this weekend, and I opened up my mail, and there's this thing about absentee voting, and I thought, oh, this is that mailing from the state of Michigan, but it wasn't. It was from a political organization that must feel my voting is aligned with them, and they wanted to encourage me to go get my absentee ballot.
Exactly. So this is not an uncommon practice at all for get out the vote efforts of all kinds. This is just the first time the state of Michigan has done a blanket version. And I think their concern was that there would be these kinds of efforts. So, for example, I live in Birmingham. Birmingham clerk has already sent out one of these to me to let me know that I could get my ballot absentee. And so I filled it out and sent it in because typically I like to go in and vote in person, but I think this year I will be happy to do an absentee ballot. So it's not at all unprecedented. It's just that the state felt that there would be disparities of this kind of effort. So some communities would be, and some voters would get a chance to do this and have that appear in their mailbox. Others wouldn't, and they just wanted to level that playing field a little bit by everybody getting one of these ballot applications in the mail.
And again, without getting into weeds, it's a political thing too, because people will look at it through a different lens depending on whether they have a D in front of their name or an R. So we can just hold on, brace yourself, folks, and for that big debate to happen over the next couple of weeks and months, and we'll all make the best out of that. Go ahead.
I was going to tell you that I actually, one of my, the project that I managed at the University of Michigan is a survey research project where we survey local government officials, including this year, local government, city and township clerks, talking about election security and whether they are concerned about issues of fraud or disinformation or problems with absentee ballot, problems with same-day registration. So I've been hearing a lot from clerks over the past couple of months as to what they're concerned about. And fraud does not appear to be a big concern among our local clerks here in Michigan. I think that they feel like they've had absentee ballot and understand how it works for a long time. They understand the change that happened in 2018, and they're gearing up for a big flood and an increase, but they feel like they've got it covered. So I think that we do have to be careful of voter fraud. This is a new world that we're living in with lots of changes. And so we want to make sure that we are diligent about that. But I also think that our clerks, fortunately, we're decentralized enough that the clerks across the state, we have more than 1,000 city and township clerks who are going to be running these elections in their communities. And so I think we're fortunate to have that kind of local oversight over these kinds of matters.
Deborah Horner, I agree. I'm a big fan of local control of things like this that are really important, and I also think it's a good idea that we have local clerks that are in control of that. But that's a whole nother issue. This whole thing. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next couple of months. Certainly to be a hotspot for political debate. The census, again, if you've been watching your mailbox, the census information has been coming. Hopefully you have seen the paperwork that has come and responded and sent your information back in and are not going to get a knock on your door in a couple of months. But the whole census program, because of the COVID-19 crisis, has been pushed back a little bit because we don't want to have people door knocking during this current situation. I assume the best thing we can all do is respond. It is the law. Respond to the federal government's census requests. What are you seeing on the whole census front, and are you keeping an eye on that?
A little bit. I also have been hearing from local governments about the challenges they've been facing. So obviously the census is run at the federal level with the help of the state and local governments, and typically they would be door knocking. Typically we have thousands of enumerators running around people's neighborhoods, and obviously that's not what we want to do. So again, our state government and our local governments and all of these nonprofit agencies who like to help promote the census have had to shift their gears away from things like library kiosks or door knocking to things like postcards or social media campaigns and things like that. So it's been, I think, a real challenge for them to take all of those preparations that they did during 2019 and kind of throw them out the window and start from scratch with the eruption of the COVID crisis. But one of the things that's really helpful for the first time in 2020 is that people can do the fill out the census online. That was not available in 2010. This is the first time they were able to do that. So people don't even have to get something in the mail. They will, but they can also do their census application or the enumeration online, which is great. I think that's extremely helpful with where we are right now. I think that however, local governments are extremely concerned that because of the discombobulation that people aren't going to fill it out at as high rates as they need to. There's so much tied to census numbers in terms of not only a congressional seat for the state of Michigan is at play, but also things like funding for hospitals and how many ventilators your community has available to it from the national stockpile is based on what the census says is how many people are in your community. So schools, roads, everything we can think about public health is tied to the census numbers. So I think communities have a huge incentive to try to get people out, but boy, they've really been thrown a loop because of the sequestering.
Dr. Deborah Horner, she is from the Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy at the University of Michigan Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, a research project manager. Thanks for your thoughts. I found that really informative and interesting. I hope our listeners did as well. Anything else you'd like to add before we say so long?
I do want to put a pitch in. June 1st is the deadline for registering for the new Independent Redistricting Commission. That was also passed as an amendment in 2018. So if any listeners want to get in at the last second, that is also available as an online registration. And then I would encourage people to, as you already mentioned, I was going to put in a pitch for sign up to be a poll worker. It's very simple training. It will be a good day and way to help in the COVID crisis and keep people who otherwise might be vulnerable safe.
Absolutely, and again, that's something that generally a lot of folks from the elder population here in our communities they serve, but now is not the time for them. So you might enjoy it. I think you would. Yeah, and it is, as you said, it's a paid position. You'll make a couple of bucks anyway. So thank you, Dr. Horner. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me on. Take care.